basically a Liverpool lad who had certain aspirations during his childhood in Liverpool, an unsettled childhood, perhaps unsettled by the docks and by the river more than by anything else. Working in Wallasey, in the bank, that was my first job at the National Provincial Bank in Wallasey, travelling across the Mersey by ferry, seeing the big liners, leaving for exotic zones, Australia, Canada. Always, I suppose this romantic streak. I have a very strong romantic streak.
Russ Tobin, in your books, the hero, is a cosmopolitan figure, but he does seem to have a nostalgia for Merseyside.
He has indeed. I think this is my own nostalgia. I love Liverpool. This morning we've been across on the ferry to see the city from the river. I think it's a marvellous place. And having lived in other much larger cities, I think perhaps the reason is that it's just large enough to take into your heart. You can grasp the city. You can drive through it in 10, 15 minutes as opposed to London. It takes you an hour and a half. It's too big and too sprawly. Liverpool and the Liverpool people, I have an enormous affinity with, even though I've been away from it for 20 years. To hear a Scouse accent in darkest Africa or Canada is always like coming home to me.
Tell me a bit more about your background. You mentioned about the unsettled boyhood.
Not domestically unsettled. I was born in Walton, moved from Walton to Wavertree at a very early age, and lived in Wavertree until the outbreak of the war, and like everybody else was evacuated to Cheshire. Then came back and lived in Anfield and eventually Wavertree again, not in the same house but in the same area. And then this restlessness that developed at quite an early age took me to Canada. Having no money, I realised that the only way I could travel abroad was to find somebody to take me. So I got a job with a Canadian bank. I transferred from the English bank, went to Canada with them. Developed an interest in radio. Always hated the bank, by the way. Developed an interest in radio. Did quite a lot of radio drama in Toronto. And eventually, having seen quite a bit of Canada, decided that I'd like to see more of the world. Worked 2 jobs for a year, moonlighting I think they call it, and went to Africa, to Rhodesia, and then furthered this interest in drama, but on the stage rather than purely in radio. And the situation in the theatre in Rhodesia is such that, although the standard is very high, the population is so small, relatively, that if you play to capacity houses for a fortnight, you've used everybody up in the district, so you've got to close and open another play. And it was one of these plays in 1958 that was entered for a drama festival, and an award was presented to me, the result of which, this was for Best Actor, the result of which was a sponsorship to come back to England. So we did the full circle. We arrived back here in 1958 with tremendous aspirations towards the theatre. Realising, shortly after I arrived in 58, that the training that I'd had in Canada for radio drama was now standing in very good stead, because I literally walked into commercial television, and within a year, I would say, was established as a commentator, a voiceover behind the commercials. And this has been my way of life since 1958.
When did you start writing, and why? It's unusual to combine the two aspects of creativity, isn't it?
I think I always had an interest in writing. I can recall at the age of about 13 or 14, my father, who was a very literate man, finding a letter which I had drafted to the Royal Toxophilid Society, whose address I'd got from an old encyclopedia at Regent's Park in London, wrote to them inquiring what sort of wood one used to make bows and arrows. I was mad keen on archery those days. Yes. And he found the letter and said that it was a letter that he would have been proud to have written, but why did I waste my time on such rubbish, such childish pursuits? But I think that the affinity with the English language, with the written word, was always there, but did not develop until I got back to England. And although I was earning a good living financially in television commercials, the telephone didn't ring often enough to suit me. And I'm one of these people that really has to work all the time. And so I started writing as something to do in between telephone calls.
That was when?
This would be about 1964, I suppose, about 8 or 9 years ago.
And was that working on a novel?
It was on a novel which took me about a year to write, which never saw the light of day. I've since cannibalized the story. I've used characters out of its situation, settings and so forth, but it was grossly overwritten, loaded with purple prose, and nobody was interested. But I think it was worthwhile experience.
When did you begin the Russ Tobin books?
After this novel, which didn't see the light of day, I wrote a thriller called Octopus Hill, and then wrote the first of the Russ Tobins. So this is going back about 6 years, I would say.
You're having remarkable success. What would you say is the difference between your books and so many other books that we get about randy young men about town?
I'd like to think it's Russ's charm. This is not only my opinion, it's the opinion of many people who have read the books, friends of the family, friends of mine. I think it's his charm. He likes his women, and they like him. He treats them with respect. And I think this is perhaps the essential difference between my randy man around town and others. That he's not the hunter, essentially. He is the hunted. He's a man who is gullible to situations. He walks in wide-eyed and, of course, enjoys it once it starts happening. He's not the complete innocent by any means, but I don't think he's the perpetuator of them. I think he is the hunted far more than the hunter.
Is there anything of you in Russ Tobin, or is Russ Tobin the man you'd like to be?
I think there's quite a lot of Russ in me, yes. I write in the first person. I write Russ Tobin in the first person.
When you say there's quite a lot of him in you, does that mean that he is a fantasy figure for you?
No, I think that it's awfully difficult to answer that question. I don't think about it when I write. I just visualise a fairly good-looking chap who has an affinity with the opposite sex, who is ambitious to a point, as I was ambitious, I think, to get out of a rut, born in circumstances where one is obliged to stay in. The family influence is such that you should stay in the rut. This is your role in life. Accept your lot, don't go beyond this, otherwise you'll be terribly unhappy. Don't have too much expectancy in life. I think this is Russ, basically. He was a man who was not satisfied with his growing childhood in the little Cheshire village, so he came to Liverpool to step out of the rut. And this was me to a T. I just couldn't stand the claustrophobia of my circumstances at the time. So in this, there is an essential part of me in Russ, or Russ in me.
This is a difficult question for you to answer. I appreciate this. But could it be that you're the personification of the Liverpool lad who has made it? You are successful. Are you wealthy, for example?
It's a relative thing, isn't it? I would say yes, reasonably wealthy, comfortably wealthy. One pays an awful lot of tax. I think that, yes, it could be said that I am the personification of the Liverpool lad who made good.
What about ambition? You mentioned about your aspirations years ago, and usually
Yes.
people who've got aspirations go on having them, don't they?
In the theatre, my aspirations have come to a terminus. I'm very happy to do what I am doing. I'm delighted to have found a job that I really enjoy doing. Monday morning doesn't hold any terrors to me at all. I enjoy going into town to do a recording. I have an affinity with a microphone, quite at home, and the money that I'm paid to do these recordings is very handsome indeed. I consider myself to be extremely fortunate to have found this job. But in the same breath, I'll say this, that I also went after the job, that I wasn't satisfied with the bank. I fought my way out of an environment and went abroad to get out of it, to escape it. Had to stay in the bank 2 years in Canada and still died the death every day. Thereafter, in very quick succession, had about 12, 14 different jobs, which would have horrified my father had he known. I didn't report home 1/4 of the jobs that I took.
Tell me some of the jobs that you did have.
Well, sewing machine selling was one. After I left the bank, I joined Lever Brothers and worked in a claustrophobic little field office, a tiny hut stuck out in the middle of nowhere with pneumatic drills pounding away all day. I stuck that for, I think, about 3 or 4 months and then left. After this, I sold sewing machines and quite enjoyed it. I'm not too fond of the principles on which they were sold. This switch selling is not a highly principled principle. I stuck it for about 6 months. I think came to an end when I met my first old age pensioner and realised that here was a woman who really did want the small, cheap machine which was advertised. And I put this in the Sewing Machine Man. It hit Russ's principles, and this was the cause of him leaving the sewing machine business, as it was mine. Fine sewing machine, selling an expensive machine to a young woman, an industrious woman with children who would make use of the machine and make it pay for itself. This was okay. I think this was fair game. But for the first old age pensioner that came along that couldn't afford it, it was dirty business.
How do you see yourself now? Is it essentially as a novelist?
Yes, I think the scales are tipping. At one time it was 9/10 television work and 1/10 novelist. The success of the Russ Tobins has been something which has blossomed really only in the past 6 months or a year, since the advent of the Courier, which was the third in the series. It began to happen with that one. Whether it happens to all novelists, whether numbers count towards success, I really have no idea. I haven't gone into this, into a survey of this. One supposes that it is because this is the fourth that it is enjoying the success. Firstly, the Sewing Machine Man did quite well, then the Debt Collector reasonably better, the Courier substantially better, and now come Again Courier very much better. The fifth is already written and is lodged with the publishers for publication January or February of next year.
What's that going to be called?
This is called Tobin Takes Off. In this one, he finishes with the Courier business and takes up a similar position in Africa on safari, doing the photographic safaris. I hope we get a lot of fun out of this one with wealthy American tourists and so on.
It's a slight variation on a previous question I put to you, but what do you think it is that really sells them? It's surely not just sex these days.
No, I hope they contain a lot of humour.
Certainly people have described them to me as being extremely entertaining, but I wondered if that wasn't a euphemism.
I think this is the word, yes, I think they are entertaining. This is all I intend to do, is to entertain people. I have no false picture of myself as the grand novelist, writing the big work. All I set out to do is to entertain people. Endowing Russ with, I think, a Liverpool sense of humour. I think this is perhaps why the books are so popular up here. He's got a quick mind, sharp mind, and I like the Liverpool sense of humour. I think it's everywhere in the world you meet a Scouse, he'll make you laugh.
Is that the thing in the Liverpool character that appeals to you most?
No, I think apart from their humour, they're stalwart people, they're very strong people. They have an immense courage. This is what I like about them, I think, and their own charm, a dry humour, which is very appealing to me.
You obviously cornered quite a substantial section of the market now. How long do you think it can go on?
I would like to think indefinitely, along the lines of P.G. Wodehouse, for instance, with his humorous books. I don't see any real reason, as long as I can keep up the standard of the Russ Tobins, why there shouldn't always be a market. This isn't only my opinion, it is the opinion of my publishers. We had a conversation the other day about this. There are other things that I'd like to write and have written, The Octopus Hill, for instance, and I've just finished another thriller. They're a little bit concerned that my Russ Tobin fans are going to be a little bit concerned with this thriller departure from the humorous story into the thriller field. But other authors have done it. Len Dayton did it very successfully. His Harry Palmer series were enormously successful, and yet he's written many other things. And I don't see any reason why I shouldn't depart from the Russ Tobins, provided, I hope, that I can carry on with the Russ Tobins. I'd like to do one of each a year.
You've said that you don't see yourself as the great novelist.
Mm-hmm.
But do you imagine that at some time in the future you could do something that would be completely out of character, out of the public character that you have at the moment?
Indeed, yes. I have a work that I'd like to attempt, a very much more serious work than the Russ Tobin's or the thriller series. I've got 2 or 3 plots that I'd like to follow up.
Could you give me any idea of the theme without giving too much away?
Yes, certainly. I haven't been at all successful with the Russ Tobins in the States, and I'd like to write something specifically for that highly lucrative market. I've no idea why the Russ Tobins don't go in the States. They may be too anglicised. The humour may be too English for them. This could be it. So I'd like to tap that market, if possible. So, therefore, it would be, I suppose, to draw any sort of analogy at all, a Harold Robbins-type work, a more all life passes here type of saga, rather than the shorter form of novel, the Russ Tobins and the thrillers.
Do you read any novels yourself?
Oh, I do, yes. I read an awful lot.
Among the authors, who is your favourite?
Wilbur Smith, I'm reading at the moment, South African author, and
Goldmine was his most
Goldmine is the one
recent
I'm reading at the
yeah.
moment, yes. I've got 2 or 3 to catch up on his. I admire his style enormously. I'm basically a simple man, and I like simple things, simple styles, and he draws his characters beautifully, and this is all I try to do. I think provided a novelist can draw his characters and bring them alive, then he's home. He can put them in any setting at all. He's found the secret of writing the successful work, the entertaining work.
How do you rate Harold Robbins?
Very easy to read. Yes, very easy to read. So-so.
Not the greatest writer living. Is he
Not the greatest
himself
writer,
described
no.
himself?
I admire his gall enormously. And I sat enthralled a few weeks ago watching Alan Wicker interview him on television, and I take my hat off to this man. He has turned it into an immense industry. And purely from a money point of view, you can't say anything against Harold Robbins. He's made it. He's found the secret.